From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo, and this is From the South. Today we start in Colombia, where with a symbolic act, the 2-year anniversary of the signing of the peace agreement was celebrated. But President Ivan Duque, along with all members of his party, failed to attend the event, effectively turning their backs on all victims and veterans of the armed conflict.
The FARC political party celebrated the 2-year anniversary since the signing of the peace agreement with the government. Party members lamented the lack of guarantees from the government, which has led to the deaths of many social leaders and former fighters who believed in the agreement.
The incredibly high number of murdered social leaders and former soldiers is the best way of describing how little guarantees the government has provided for everyone.
The celebration's most emotional moment came from one of the victims of an attack at Club El Nogal. She spoke about forgiving her attackers after listening to the testimonies of guerrillas who truly believed the country could be changed through armed fighting.
The level of inequality along with impossible situations led them down that path. I choose to forgive them. We cannot continue walking down a path that leads to war.
The presence of former combatants and victims was contrasted with the absence of President Ivan Duque and members of the Centro Democrático Party, who have openly talked about undoing the peace agreement. The former member of the government's peace delegation to Havana, Cuba, Roy Barreras, reminded attendants that peace is not a political issue.
We have the responsibility to uphold the agreement as a right. To say peace is a political issue, depending on the government. Is to say that there can be no peace where there is no government.
The United Nations has also warned about the Colombian government's failure to maintain guarantees agreed upon.
The process of reintroducing former fighters back into society has been too slow, and many former combatants remain deeply worried about their own safety. Victims instead continue waiting for the funds they were offered.
FARC party members, opposition senators, victims and international delegations repeated their commitment to peace and called on President Duque to uphold guarantees and maintain the peace agreement.
Moving on to Argentina, the Supreme Court has rejected an appeal by the indigenous leader Milagros Sala against her detention. Sala has been in prison or under house arrest for most of the last 2 years in connection with several charges. This appeal related to the so-called eggs case, where she was accused of throwing eggs at the house of Gerardo Morales, the governor of Jujuy province. She says she wasn't even present that day, and the cases against her are political persecution. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Rabina Roth, has more.
Argentina's Supreme Court has ruled against an extraordinary appeal made by the defense team of Milagros Sala, who has been incarcerated for alleged involvement in an attack against the office of former senator and current governor of Jujuy province, Gerardo Morales. Sala is accused of being the mastermind behind the attack, but she denies any involvement. In 2016, Sala was sentenced by a Jujuy court on charges of aggravated assault and threatening public officials, and sentenced to 3 years in prison. A different court overturned that ruling in 2017, saying the charges of threatening officials were unfounded, and asked another court to review her case in order to provide a new sentence. The Supreme Court's decision is due to the fact that her sentence is not yet confirmed. The court hasn't analyzed Sala's defense team's arguments and has said that to have the Supreme Court look over a case, there must be a definitive sentence in place. Therefore, a judicial court must retry Sala and provide a new sentence.
And still in Argentina, the country is busy preparing for the G20 summit, which is mere days away. The government is deploying thousands of security personnel and restricting public transportation in Buenos Aires. Buses, subways, trains, and even airport transport services will operate on a restricted schedule between Thursday and Sunday. Over 13,000 police, Navy, and airport security personnel will patrol the capital. In addition, the U.S. and other countries are also expected to help with security for the global conference. Our correspondent in Argentina, Edgardo Esteban, has more on what's been happening with the G20 summit.
An intense week of activity continues. There are a number of demonstrations planned, including at the Atlanta Stadium and a gathering on Thursday at the People's Summit outside Congress. There are going to be tents, debates, forums, and open talks marking the rejection of the G20 leaders' presence. More than 6,000 attendees, including international delegations and journalists, are about to arrive, and there's severe controls in place for activists participating in the counter-summit. There are a lot of expectations for what is going to happen in the city, because whilst traffic is normal now, we're in a zone which will soon have prohibited access. There are going to be 22,000 policemen. If you recall the Malvinas War, there were 15,000 soldiers active. For this 48-hour summit, there will be more than 20,000 members of security forces in 3 zones. It's going to be impossible to get around. Airports will be closed, public services such as trains and buses are going to be interrupted, roads will be closed, the port of Buenos Aires will be closed as well. Argentina is going to be isolated because of President Macri's government's security decision. Aircraft carriers have been brought in from the US as well as planes from other countries. Israel has helped with border control. Despite warnings and repressive operations, the counter-summit is still being held. And on Friday, a big demonstration called by social organizations, trade unions, and all kinds of diversity movements is going to take place in rejection of Macri's policies and the G20. It will also stand against the accord signed between the IMF and Argentina.
We thank Edgardo for that report. Finally, the second leg of the Copa Libertadores final between River Plate and Boca Juniors will be played outside of Argentina in the first week of December. The final was initially only delayed until Sunday after River Plate supporters attacked the Boca Juniors team bus before being postponed. At least 6 players were injured and some were affected by tear gas and pepper spray used by the police to disperse the River fans. A statement from South American football's governing body, CONMEBOL, said a venue would be decided as soon as possible.
No, I'm not going to give my opinion because we have no intention of playing another final. The Discipline and Sanctions Court is now the body which has to decide and which has to study the case and apply a punishment whether it's right or not. After we read the verdict, if the answer is negative, we will appeal to CONMEBOL.
Members of the Brazilian Socialist Party are speaking out against the incoming government of Jair Bolsonaro and its recent comments against the Cuban doctors who were working in the country.
Members of the PSB in the country's lower house have made President-elect Jair Bolsonaro responsible for what is sure to be a tragedy for Brazilians once all Cuban doctors have left the country.
The lack of doctors in Brazil is now the responsibility of the president-elect. He's at fault for the Cuban doctors leaving. He is responsible for the thousands who will be left with no access to medical attention.
In a letter supporting the Cuban government's decision to pull out these doctors, members of the PSB also lamented the various positions of the incoming government.
The Cuban government made the right choice. These people came to help Brazil. They helped those less fortunate, those in rural areas, and then they were humiliated and attacked during Bolsonaro's campaign. The response by the Cuban government shows they will defend their dignity.
Over 28 million Brazilians were cared for by the Cuban doctors, who worked in the most vulnerable areas of the country, regions with low rates of human development.
The Cuban doctors took care of people. They felt people's pain and tried to find ways of resolving it. Brazilians felt this and valued the doctor's care. Brazilian doctors are often more concerned with money and their own living conditions, because medicine is a field for those with money.
Out of the 16,000 health experts who formed part of the More Doctors program, over 8,000 were Cuban.
After insulting comments by Jair Bolsonaro drove the Cuban doctors out of Brazil, many have come to their defense. Current and former students of Cuban medical schools highlight how thousands of health professionals graduate every year in Cuba, with many students coming from abroad. Let's find out more on this story.
About 100 kilometers from Havana lies the city of Matanzas, where one of the country's 25 medical universities is located. Medical students participate in local healthcare from the first year of their studies.
We need to have a community-based approach if we want to achieve sustainable development goals. It is only through communities that quality of life can be improved, especially with healthcare, as it is stated in the World Health Organization guidelines.
The university has students hailing from over 40 countries. Brazilian Mauricio Brito studies here and says the criticism of Brazil's president-elect Jair Bolsonaro about the professionalism of Cuban doctors is completely unfounded.
I disagree with his criticism about the professional abilities of Cuban doctors. The training is very good here. We study preventive medicine and have practical classes from the very first year.
This is the same academic and practical training that the thousands of doctors who are being recalled by the Cuban government from Brazil have received.
It's true that the returning doctors are now more than just doctors. They gain incredible experiences, not just medical, but human experiences that made them much more than just doctors. They went to remote places that never had access to healthcare before.
In Cuba, over 45,000 doctors from 115 countries have been trained in the medical field. Cuba also offers internationally renowned training for more than 60 different medical specialities.
A new migrant caravan is ready to depart from El Salvador towards the United States. This time, hundreds of Central American migrants are taking to social media for answers, whilst also sharing their fears and concerns on these same platforms.
I've been hearing about these caravans for quite some time. I've heard that 2 have left already. This one will be the 3rd. Another one is expected to leave later. Who knows how many more?
We are preparing ourselves because our country is in chaos. We are moving on enthusiastically, hoping we all arrive to the U.S.
And the Mexican government says it is deporting many of the migrants who were tear gassed on Sunday at the U.S.-Mexico border. Our correspondent in Tijuana, Alina Duarte, has more details.
Close to 100 people have been deported or are in the process of being deported, according to the National Institute of Migration. President Donald Trump has basically said that no one will be allowed to jump over the wall, and he justified the use of tear gas and rubber bullets against people, including women and children. The people who tried to cross the U.S. wanted to be detained on the other side of the border and get a fair hearing. They could not achieve that. After this, tension has spread here in the shelter in Tijuana, where there are more than 5,000 people registered. There are people who have been here for 2 weeks, and it is 2 months since they left home. Uncertainty is part of the life of these thousands of people who are living in different shelters here in Tijuana. We only get access to these shelters twice a day, but we have seen people sleeping on plastic bags and cardboard. A camping tent is a luxury. There are just 24 toilets for more than 5,000 people. Mexican people are helping a lot, bringing food and other supplies. NGOs are giving supplies and medical care to everyone, especially pregnant women and children who mainly suffer from respiratory problems.
We thank Alina for that report. The DPRK's Supreme People's Assembly leader, Kim Jong-nam, is on an official visit to Venezuela to consolidate economic and diplomatic ties. Jong-nam paid tribute to Simón Bolívar along with a delegation from the National Constituent Assembly. He'll meet with President Nicolás Maduro before his visit is over. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Vice President of Ecuador, María Alejandra Vicuña, has been accused by a former advisor of asking for financial contributions during her time as a congresswoman. Ángel Sacbay made the allegations in an interview with local TV. He said that from 2011 and 2012, he had to make a monthly deposit in Vicuña's personal bank account of $300. He said that after getting a promotion, he was asked to raise his contribution to $1,400 per month. Another assemblywoman was recently dismissed over similar accusations. Our correspondent in Quito, Denise Herrera, has a story.
Hello, good afternoon. Indeed, the Vice President of Ecuador, María Alejandra Vicuña, has been accused of making illegal contributions to her assistance. According to one of her former advisors, in a statement, he denounced that he worked with Vicuña in two different positions and he had to make a monthly payments of between $300 and $1,400 from 2011 to 2013, directly to the Vice President. In light of these events, the Attorney General of Ecuador, Ruth Palacios, confirmed that her office will start an investigation against these accusations. Also, the Vice President of Ecuador, María Alejandra Vicuña, in her Twitter account confirmed that she will prove her innocence and she will prove her innocence through the courts. Is all the information we have for now. Back to you at the studios.
We thank Denise for that report. Moving on, Scotiabank has confirmed it's set to sell its banks in 9 Caribbean countries as it downsizes its international markets. Their plan is to sell the Caribbean banks to the Trinidad and Tobago-based Republic Financial Holdings Limited. Larger markets in Latin America are still on the table, as Scotiabank reported that its international profits have been greater than its Canadian business over the past year. Telesur has held meetings in several Caribbean countries to discuss strengthening its presence in the region. In Antigua and Barbuda, the channel's president, Patricia Villegas, met the Prime Minister Gaston Brown to talk about the expanding both production capacity and distribution. The Prime Minister said Telesur had an important job to do, connecting the English-speaking Caribbean with Latin America.
Very important, and I certainly want to commend Telesur for establishing a branch here in Antigua and Barbuda, which will help to bring the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and, generally speaking, Latin America closer to the Caribbean, so that we can exchange news items and that the people within the region will have information. Those in South America and beyond will have information from the Caribbean, and similarly would understand what is happening in your part of the world. In essence, I think it is helping to integrate individuals in this hemisphere, and it is an initiative that my government welcomes, and we will support the initiative.
Advocates will gather in Haiti on Wednesday for a high-level meeting on HIV/AIDS. Eleanor Frederick of Antigua and Barbuda's HIV/AIDS network will deliver the feature address of the topic of HIV in the Caribbean. According to the United Nations Population Fund, the Caribbean has the highest incidence rate of reported AIDS cases in the Americas.
From the American University of Antigua Medical School.
Proposed tax reform in Costa Rica continues to move towards approval, despite the ongoing national strike that has lasted for over 2 months. Our correspondent in San Jose, Fernando Francia, brings us the details.
Costa Rica is still debating tax reform and how to apply legal frameworks to best deal with the fiscal crisis in the country. The Legislative Assembly is debating the reforms, but they're still waiting for all the reports they need to reach a decision. For 78 days, there have been national strikes against tax reform. Several educational institutions are demanding better treatment ever since the Education Ministry announced new austerity measures. For example, there are 2,400 teachers from schools across the country facing redundancies because they're not part of next year's educational plan.
That was Fernando Francia from Costa Rica. More news now in Guatemala. The International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women had special significance, giving the recent murder of Alejandra Y. Cochub with Quechua indigenous women gathering to demand justice for victims of femicide.
Lighting sacred fires. These indigenous Mayan women in Guatemala pay tribute to the memory of Iko Chu.
We women need to get together and demonstrate against what happened to her. We are lighting candles to ask for justice in Alejandra's name.
Alejandra was killed in a brutal way on November 9th in the Guatemalan municipality of Chisec by her partner, Mario Tutical.
She had been subject to violence for a long time and ended up as a victim of femicide. We want justice for our friend.
For these women, the murder of Alejandra reflects the situation of rising violence against women in rural communities.
When institutions do not take action, it's a big setback for us women. That's why we demand the judiciary to do their jobs with no ifs, buts, or excuses.
According to official statistics, in 2018, there have been more than 700 cases of femicide in the country. These figures could be even higher, as not all cases are properly registered.
We still justify violence against women. We normalize it. When a woman experiences a violent situation, society blames her.
During the march, women also rejected the use of violence against women in public spaces. They also wanted to highlight the sexual abuse accusations involving Guatemalan President Jimmy Morales, who had the case against him thrown out.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this.
An occasion to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along to find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives, Friday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. A United States federal judge has failed to rule on whether charges against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange should be made public. Free press advocates want the judge to reveal the charges that he's facing. However, prosecutors are arguing that the public has no right to know the charges until an arrest is made.
Yeah, I think the reason that the Reporters Committee in particular is particularly interested in this matter is because of the possibility, or at least a suggestion that's been made, that the criminal charges against Mr. Assange are predicated on his publication of information, which is obviously something the news media does quite a bit. We also think there's just a general public interest in this case, not just in understanding, understanding how the court functions, but also understanding what happened in this particular matter, which has really captured public attention. So I think the public interest certainly weighs in favor of disclosure. We'll have to see, I think, how the court ultimately comes out.
The Saudi Crown Prince is on a tour of Arab states for the first time since the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Let's take a look at that and more stories from around the world.
Protests have erupted in Tunisia against the arrival of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman over the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The prince's scheduled arrival is part of a tour of Arab states. He departed from Egypt after visiting Bahrain and the UAE. However, Tunisians have made it clear that he's not welcome. Demonstrators were seen chanting, "Murder is not welcome in Tunisia and shame on Tunisia's rulers." Khashoggi was last seen going into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, in October. After much speculation, the Saudis finally admitted to killing him and dismembering his body. 11 people have been charged. The CIA concluded that the Crown Prince was involved in his murder. Increasing humanitarian problems in Afghanistan are causing parents to sell their children into marriage to pay off debt or buy food. According to the UN Children's Agency, 161 children aged between 1 month and 16 years old were sold over a 4-month period, 6 of whom were boys. Alison Parker, a UNICEF spokeswoman, says there's an increase in child forced labour as well.
So parents actually get into debt, and they hope that with maybe rain coming soon, they would be able to pay off the debt and have their livelihoods and their, to be able to provide for their family. But unfortunately, the drought continued to drag on, and they could not pay this debt. So unfortunately, children are now becoming the collateral.
Firefighters in the French city of Lyon are protesting to demand higher salaries amid the continued Yellow Vest protests. Police were on scene as firefighters blocked the streets and marched towards Belleville Square with torches and banners. The strike comes just a few days before the Festival of Light that attracts thousands of visitors.
NASA's InSight spacecraft have already sent the first picture after landing in Mars. Engineers in Los Angeles burst into cheers as they received signals confirming the spacecraft arrived on Red Planet after a 7-month journey. The InSight sent selfie photographs showing the edge of one lander leg beside a rock. Now it's begun its 2-year mission studying seismic movements and underground temperatures on Mars. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.